Hello, hello, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining this morning. As you know, we're also streaming live on YouTube. So if you haven't had a chance to check out our YouTube channel, please make sure to check that out and subscribe. So here we are, week two, session two of our AI in management. And today we're going to take a dive into the connection points between ethics, compliance, and bias, which all relates to just experiencing AI in the management space. So, as usual, I'll start with introducing myself and who I am and where my experience is coming from. So, I'm Dr. Myra Austin. I am the CEO and founder of Management Cues, which is the company that's hosting this webinar. And we are unique in the training space, and I'll share why and what it is that we do different and why our focus is leading us to the future of training, which I like to refer to often. So, who is Management Cues? So, Management Cues is a training company that focuses on managers and leaders, but we do it with a neuroscience backed approach that's scientifically proven to work. So, we really take a look at the manager's experience as they're learning, and AI is what's happening right now. So, we're also not only seeing what's happening with AI in the management space, we're integrating it and using it in our programming and future programming to create more immersive experiences. So that's how we kind of connect around the topic of AI and everything that's coming our way. So in each session, we cover the same way week over week. We start with an overview, we break the topics down, we go through takeaways, and we give you a list of resources that you can adopt immediately to help you navigate or just be knowledgeable around the changes in the landscape. And then, of course, we give a few minutes for questions if anything should be out there, and we close it out. So short and sweet for these webinar series. So let's start by positioning. Last week, we talked about the mind shift that occurs or should be occurring around AI because it's transformational. It's changing the way that we do things. So when we look at the impact that it has and the emerging role of the manager, we have to take a look at what's happening already, right? So AI is already making decisions that affect our teams and the work landscape, our customers and companies, right? Even if they're just at the place where they're considering AI, it's coming and it's coming fast, right? So the question isn't if bias or ethical concerns or even compliance concerns exist in AI, it's whether you're actually aware and you're managing to it, because we've started to legislate, even though we're slow in that area to catch up with everything that AI does. In terms of bias, there is so much behind bias and knowing how to detect it, how to manage it, how to lead through it. Most managers aren't actually equipped to do that. And AI, with the creation of automation bias and other areas like hallucinations and misinterpretations, will require us as leaders and managers to be able to make those distinctions. So that's just a couple of examples around why the connecting points for today are so important and so relevant and timely. So why it matters to you as a manager. So it matters because legal and regulatory exposure takes place even if legislation hasn't caught up to the transformational aspect of AI and the impact it's having. Reputational and financial risk exists there already if you're exploring it, if you're implementing it, if it's being mismanaged, misunderstood, or mishandled. That's where managers and leaders actually have an opportunity to mitigate risk, right? So your team's trust and psychological safety is very much at play because AI makes people nervous in terms of job displacement, in terms of what it looks like, and how it's introduced. All these things are true of workplace. Accountability doesn't stop with the algorithm, right? So just using it as a tool isn't necessarily going to be the end all. There's so much to it. How we use it, the ethics around it. Do we actually know how it works? And how do we manage the experiences around it, right? Those are all things and concerns managers should be thinking about as this is happening to remain competitive. So here are some key questions to keep in mind. And these are questions that our leaders should be posing to managers. But if you're a knowledgeable manager and are using AI, these are questions that you should definitely be asking, right? Or raising in meetings, right? When it comes to AI. Do I know how AI does what it does? Do we understand how it's designed, what its intention is, what its limitations are? Who does this AI affect, right? What is the impact on people and populations and audiences? And who is left out of the equation when it's designed? Because that is actually what directly impacts the bias that it creates, right? And it's just kind of a sequence of events. And that's how AI pretty much works, right? So how do we audit or challenge AI driven decisions? And that is such a critical question because we need to start thinking about, do we know how to vet what the output is giving us? Do we know how to differentiate what's real and what isn't, what's valid and what isn't? Can we detect a bias in the output, or are we not trained enough to do that? And so these are important questions in this new AI landscape. And what is my responsibility or liability when AI gets it wrong? And I think that one of the common misconceptions right now as you're using it is that it's better or more correct than maybe we are, and that's not always the case. Actually, there's misinterpretations that happen, there's hallucinations that happens, and so we experience that automation bias that we talked about, where we default automatically to thinking that it because it sounds so confident, because it sounds or looks right, that it actually is. And that's not necessarily true. How jurisdiction is determined with with AI. One thing that I keep bringing up to gauge the audience to see how much awareness there is around day-to-day experiences is the concept of meetings, right? So if you're using an AI note taker, for example, do you know where that information is stored? Because where that data is stored, where it is held physically, right? That's what determines jurisdiction should something litigious come up, something legal, right? And so those are things that for every time I've tested that question with a student population or with a management team, no manager has been aware of that, and most students aren't either. Yet we participate with and collaborate using AI note takers pretty frequently these days, right? On things like Zoom or Google Meet or whatever virtual platform we're using. So bias and AI, we're going to break down each of these constructs because they're so critical. Let's break these down. So why AI bias matters in management. So AI is increasingly used in the process of hiring and screening at this time, performance evaluations, promotion decisions, workforce analytics. That's already kind of everywhere. And so what happens is that there's a key reality that we should be looking at. The key reality is that AI does not eliminate bias. It actually can scale it and automate it. So we have to be very careful, and we ourselves have to be able to detect it, right? So management implication here around bias is that bias is no longer just human. It is now systemic. It's embedded in tools. And if we're not aware or we're not asking a question around which tools it's embedded in, that's an example of an opportunity or a risk waiting to happen because we're just not aware enough in terms of how it's embedded and what risk it poses. So, where AI bias comes from. So, I think it's important to understand how AI is designed and the type of AI that you're using, and how it's actually living in your environment, right? Not just using it and getting excited about the time it saves, the confidence in the output. Those are all great things, and those are definitely benefits. I don't want to take away from it, but you have to have a sense of objectivity around it. So becoming knowledgeable as a manager becomes the goal in this new environment, right? So what is bias in AI? So it's systematic and unfair discrimination that's produced by the algorithms. It's been proven, it's been researched. Right now, that's the stage of AI that we're in. It's just commonplace. It occurs when outputs consistently disadvantage certain groups, and AI is not objective. So AI doesn't have judgment. It doesn't have a lived lens. And so for that reason, it doesn't make a judgment calls. It just moves forward off of sequences and patterns as it's trying to come up with the best results, right? That's literally what happens. And so it's important for us to reflect on the historical data that's being used, the human decisions that need to take place, and the organizational patterns that we witness, right? Like those are all things that we have to correct in terms of output, and we have to be able to identify it with what we get. So, data bias. Training data reflects that there are past inequities because it just takes the pool of data and it synthesizes, right? It breaks it down. So, an example of where this has shown up has been in recruitment and hiring and HR and the use of AI. So, hiring tools are trained on past hires. Typically, that's how it's been done so far. And so it starts to favor similar candidates. So if we were hiring or a company was hiring with a pattern of bias or discrimination, it will continue to make recommendations in that way because it's just following that pattern. So management risk here is that it reinforces a lack of diversity or poor hiring practices or just straight up legal violation if you're not careful. So it's important for us to not only know the law, but be able to call it out in the outputs that we receive, right? So there's also algorithm design bias. And so I've done a lot of workshop work around AI for about a year and a half now. And at the higher education level, it's really great because I have a lot of geniuses that I learn from, and hopefully they learn something from me too. But a lot of them are in AI and they're in the infrastructure aspect of the business where they're designing, they're coding, they're doing all these live things. And they really understand the pros and cons, the limitations in design. And the average consumer doesn't. And it's really obvious, right? And managers fall into that average consumer audience. So developers make choices as they're developing and coding and programming, and they make choices around what variables matter. They decide how success is defined. And so the management risk there is that there could be misaligned metrics because at the end of the day, there is somebody designing this. So if the person themselves doesn't understand bias, maybe never experienced it, maybe has always worked in a homogenous group where they're only one kind of person, right? Those are the things that get introduced from inception with AI. So it's important for us to know that that is how that happens very naturally too. That's just kind of how it evolves. Selection bias. So that's incomplete or unrepresentative data sets. And an example is performance data missing certain groups. Management risk is, for example, conducting inaccurate evaluations, right? And so we need to be able to translate the data and understand performance really well for us to be able to tell if what it's giving us is actually a good representation of reality. Measurement bias. So this happens as well. There are poor proxies used for complex concepts. So an example of that is using hours online as a sign of productivity. For those of us who have managed and led, for me, it's been over 2 decades. I know that having a performance metric define all is just an error, right? You have to have a balanced set of KPIs that really speak to true performance, and that includes qualitative and quantitative aspects of how somebody is performing. So an example of those hours online is just not there's not enough depth to build a profile around just that for somebody's performance. So the management risk is penalizing off of what AI says. For things that may not be visible or may not be apparent in the data. So it's important for us to recognize those areas. So types of AI bias managers should know. So there is historical bias, which is when past inequities are embedded in the data. There's representation bias, where there is underrepresentation of certain groups. There's the automation bias that we mentioned last week, which is over trusting AI outputs, and confirmation bias, which is AI assisted, and it's using AI to validate existing beliefs. So we already experience confirmation bias naturally. Our brain does that to protect itself. act from a neuroscience perspective, we have to understand that AI will do that too if we prompt it that way. So we have to check ourselves for our own bias, right? And evaluation bias, which is biased benchmarks or performance criteria. So these are things we have to get really good at as managers to be competitive and effective if we're collaborating, partnering with AI. So ethics and AI, let's break that down. Okay, so we learned a little bit about bias. Let's learn a little bit about how ethic plays in this space. So AI is now influencing some of these things that we looked at before: hiring, performance, and promotions and terminations, right? So when we're making these kinds of decisions as managers, ethics definitely comes into play. And so the key reality there is that the moment AI informs a decision, it becomes a management ethics issue to accept it or not. And so you need to know that the liability, the accountability is 100% on you, regardless of what AI told you, right? Not just and this is not just a technology issue, right? And so it's important for us to start to make those distinctions and create boundaries between ourselves and the AI. So management accountability, managers are accountable for outcomes, fairness, and the impact on people, right? Our judgment cannot be delegated, and it's important to be able to pause, because anything that involves AI feels really automatic, really fast, and feels and sounds really confident, right? So it's tricky. What ethical AI means in management, it means that AI is not just about the system. It's about how you're using it as a manager to make decisions, to manage, to evaluate, all of those things, to communicate, all of those things. Ethical AI is responsible decision making using AI tools. And in order to do that, you have to set some boundaries. So, in practice, we're talking about fair treatment of employees, transparency in how you're making decisions, what information you're looking at. Are you verifying it? Are you validating it? Accountability for the outcomes. You have to be really clear with the fact that whatever you decide, even if it was AI assisted, it's 100% on you, right? And avoiding harm, intentional or unintentional. Something like bias can come up in an unintentional way for managers who are using AI. But at the end of the day, it's still harmful to whatever population that bias is harming. So, core ethical principles for managers using AI. So, this is what you want to think about in terms of just business ethic, management, leadership, right? Fairness, accountability, transparency, privacy, and human oversight. And so, in this flow of automation where things are being sold as easier, faster, better, less cost, these are the areas we have to stand in and be very clear around. So, where ethical issues show up in management are those areas that we called out: hiring and recruitment. I'm seeing it in a ton of research and case studies. So, clearly, we have not gotten this part right, right? Performance management. I'm seeing that show up in dashboards, analytics, recommendations, in which managers are delegating judgment because they feel like the AI is indicating that a person isn't performing, and they're not looking at a whole picture, or maybe have never been trained to, right? Promotions and talent decisions, how we're hiring is definitely being affected. So is how we're promoting. And so we're seeing an impact there. And employee monitoring. So AI, because of all that it can do and because it can go for 24 hours, is being used to monitor how people work every hour of the day in some companies, especially internationally, where there is less regulation. And that's scary because it's creating additional types of pressure and stress for employees who are definitely burning out. So that was ethics. Let's touch on compliance. Okay, so we're going to do compliance. Because our webinars are short and sweet, so 30 minutes, and we'll hit and head towards the end. But why AI compliance is now a management issue. So AI is being used in employment decisions, monitoring, and operations, all areas that managers work day in and day out in. In the US, there is no unified federal AI law yet. And again, legislation is taking a minute to catch up. But the result of this is that there's a patchwork of state laws, and managers are on the front line of compliance. So whether they realize it right now or not, whether executives realize it right now or not, there is a gap that is widening. And again, I mentioned in the first webinar, I don't see a lot of training in these areas of AI taking place. So, key implication: compliance is no longer just legal or HR. It is now a day to day management responsibility because managers have to be not only aware and knowledgeable, they have to be on the lookout for how these things show up because they may not be as obvious as they were before. And that requires a skilled manager to be able to call these out. So what AI compliance means for managers, at its core, AI compliance requires managers to ensure that there isn't discrimination taking place with decision making, that transparency is there in how we're using AI, why we're using it, who's impacted, and that there's human oversight in consequential decision making. That documentation is clear and that we understand how we came to a conclusion. And the answer can't be AI told me, right? Like that is not going to work. It's not going to hold up in court. I can tell you that right now. And data responsibility and privacy protection, right? Where is our data stored? Where is the jurisdiction? If a legal issue were to come up, where do we have to litigate it? Those are important questions for us to know because sometimes we're being suckered in when we're giving in or opting in using things like an AI note taker. So here are the states that are spearheading AI law in case you're curious and want to follow up on what it looks like to be compliant in the near future. Keeping in mind that it's slow moving and it's just starting. But California is the most active and influential. Their position is regulatory and to be that leader, be broad and aggressive. Colorado has the first comprehensive AI law. And so I'm sharing with managers and young professionals who are coming up in this environment to take a look at what Colorado's doing because they have a framework around AI governance, which is not what everybody else has at this time. Illinois is employment-focused AI regulation. So they're an early mover in workplace AI regulation. So again, you want to be a knowledgeable manager. You want to be competitive. Pay attention to what's happening in the law because that's exactly what's going to translate over to workforce. And New York, transparency and hiring controls. They have a strong focus on employment and algorithmic accountability. And Texas is working on emerging governance models. And so they're looking on pro-business but structured regulation. And last but not least, Utah is looking at an early policy framework. And their position is one of the first states to pass an AI-specific policy. So I know that for me, as an operations leader, when I was working with employers, my competitive advantage really centered on mitigating risk. And I did that by understanding the law and understanding why certain things needed to happen, how to develop my team, and how to raise new leaders in being purposeful, intentional, and impactful. And so ultimately, that's where the training approach comes from, right? Is all these things. But key patterns across the states, right? Patterns are an indicator of the wave that's coming, right? So despite different approaches, most laws converge on preventing algorithmic discrimination, requiring transparency, enforcing human accountability, and protecting consumer and employee rights. So that's where the focus is. My recommendation is always for managers to keep an eye on those things and give it a thought around how that would play out in your environment, right? And what kind of AI you're using at this time. So these are our key takeaways for today. AI does not reduce legal responsibility for managers or anybody really. The US is a patchwork right now in terms of legislation around AI. State laws are driving compliance. AI in hiring and performance is high risk. That area, focus on building practices, policy, protocols around that stuff. Transparency, audits, and documentation are non-negotiable. That is literally what will be challenged in court if something is to come up. Managers are now the compliance gatekeepers around AI, whether they're ready for it, whether they're aware or not, whether the executive teams have landed on that yet. Again, we're in a very excitable place, I feel like, and I see so many gaps in these areas. So I hope that this is a little bit of insight and it's helpful and that you start to get a little bit curious about what a future role in leadership or management would look like because it will encompass these areas. Okay, so I'll go ahead and leave a few seconds for questions. I don't see any questions in chat or in our YouTube, so I'll go ahead and keep moving forward. But training and support resources. So for those of you that registered and attended, you'll get a session recording, you'll get a copy of the webinar deck. Training programs are visible and available online at our website. And we also offer a management planner, which is great for managers to kind of frame their thinking around how to be more impactful. And our neuroscience studies conducted by Neuron are available on our website if you want to check those out and what the scientific results showed around our approach. And if you'd like to schedule a meeting with me, please feel free to set a consultation. Love to chat on any pain points, concerns, or anything that you're curious about. And then last but not least, we offer management membership programs that allow you to stay on top of management trends and training month to month at a really affordable rate for you, your group of managers, or even executive teams. Okay, so with that, our next session is going to be on April 1st, and it's going to be week 3, performance management in an AI-driven workplace. So we're going to break down just performance management and AI. And so I hope to see you there. So thank you so much for your time, and I'll catch you on the next time.